Hi everyone, it's Natalie here. So let's look at the Mary L. 9's, which we cannot do unless we start with the Hermit. So here we have a very, very watery Hermit. This Hermit is, I have thankfully the astrological association down here, which is not a water sign. It is Virgo. It's actually Virgo. She never really states precisely why it is that she chose this stormy maelstrom here for her Hermit. It's never fully explained. But I think it's fair that we could say, if we're looking at a lamp, we're looking at a flame, what is the one element that is a threat to that flame? It's water. So when we look at this Hermit, the Hermit is finding the ability to weather whatever storm it is that's coming through, any emotion that comes through, any crisis of self, is going to be survived, right, with that light intact, with that inner light still going and glowing, as they say. We see here too, we have these waves of, sweeping over and curling back. And there's one that curls back around into the Hermit. So the Hermit is not distinguishing themselves as separate from the storm. And yet, the light is so delicately held on to. He's not clinging. In the midst of that storm, he does not cling to that lamp. The lamp is simply, it's precarious. He's holding it very precariously. She really doesn't address that. When I look at the book, she really doesn't address it. She talks about a lot of other things, but does not talk about the choices that she makes here in this card. And I think that's really off-putting for people, because it's like, but then what am I looking at and why is it there? The cloak, we don't even know that he's not a part of the ocean, the great ocean, so to speak, the primordial soup himself. We don't know that he's necessarily different. But there is a quote that I remember from, I got to remember the guy's name. He was from the Himalayan Institute. He's known as Panditji or Panditji. And he took over after Swami Rama passed away, or left his body, as they like to say, or his corporeal form. And I went to hear him give a talk back in 2006 or 2007. It was early 2007. And I was in a very difficult place in myself at that time. And I remember he spoke about all of us being part of this primordial ocean, and that every now and again a wave comes up. And it comes up and it does what a wave does. It rises and then it falls back down. And he said that, my friends, is the scope of your life, your individual life and individuality. Okay. So, let's put it in context. The who and what we are is not simply this. It's not just this body. But isn't it a beautiful wave while it crests? Right? So in many respects, we could look at the Hermit this way, right? Isn't it such a beautiful wave while it crests? And, what's capable or inherent as a part of this wave is this extraordinary light, right? As tenuous as it is, as likely to go out as it will be, right? Because it will be eventually consumed back into the ocean, but it will arise in a different form. Right? And who knows what it is that creates that light. But there it is, and it's remarkable. You know, she then writes, what does she write about it? Okay, let's look at what she writes about it. She writes, innocence and experience. What lies beneath the corporeal robes of the hermit, right? And then she offers suggestions. We go to the next page. She writes, like the sun, the enlightened soul shines outward, banishing the darkness as wisdom banishes ignorance. His robes are flesh, pulled tightly around him, but still can't contain it all. Is there anything more beautiful and luminous than a person living 100% of who they are? Right? Isn't that beautiful? It's just beautiful. She goes on to say, in the end, the hermit is war-torn and scarred inside and out, but he has persevered and he has carried forth the energy to a new generation so it can live on and chase their holy grails. The hermit is a piece of the sun. The hermit is not all alone because he is secluded. He is alone because he is all there is. Okay, so she then goes on to give various different possibilities for divinatory meanings, most of which I found to be pretty good. You know, completion, accomplishment, enlightenment, finding your own inner sun and source of light, truth, power, guiding other people to their inner sun, etc., ad nauseum. I use wise solitude for this one, because when I came up with that keyword, I was reading only with the first edition. It has helped me. I don't know. I mean, you could see this one in a number of different ways, but generally when the hermit comes up, there's a necessity to get away from, you know, the primordial soup itself, right? Or the consciousness that we all have through the media, through YouTube, through the internet, through social media, through, you know, whatever means that collective consciousness comes through. And in order to really hear my own voice, in order to enjoy the lantern of my own light, I have to really get away from that. And I haven't really been able to do that for a very long time. Not properly. It's just been very hard to do. I have a lack of trust right now in the world. It's 2022 in January when I'm filming this. 2 years on from when I started the original series, and everything changed in that time. You know, everything changed in that time. But I do trust in my own light, and I do trust in the light of the universe. And I trust that even if a lot of darkness is overwhelming that light, I know that mine is still there. But I need to work more towards a wise solitude in order to give it its own space, right? Because this prevailing sense of what everyone does enters in, and it causes us to lose grip, right, of what that light really is. See, there's a lot of possibility in that hermit. There's a lot of possibility there. Yeah, I do love this card. Love this card. So let's move on and look at then what happens when we separate that card out into, you know, and its meanings into the minors. Okay. So first we start with the 9 of Wands. And this one to me always reminds me of like a Toulouse-Lautrec poster or painting. I don't know quite why. I think it's possibly the line work here. It reminds me of that kind of grandiose style and so on. She writes in here that the 9 of Wands is the culmination of the suit of wands and fire. So everything we've seen in the wands up to this point is what we're getting in the 9. Okay, it's the high point of the minors in the suit of fire wands. Okay. What does fire want, she writes? To express itself and be a hero, to live free, Oh, to live, be free, have free will, create, burn, change, destroy, transform. As someone with an awful lot of fire in their chart, I have to agree. That's definitely part of it. Let's see. The tiger is all you, without judgment or pretense, nothing purged or watered down, tamed or denied, not muted or humbled. It is your unique nature, purpose, power, and energy. Then she finishes that paragraph with an interesting, with a very interesting sentence. She writes, "You are the living crest of a 1,000,000-year-old wave." Okay, so she is referring us right back to the Hermit, right? This is you. This is us, riding the crest of that 1,000,000-year-old wave, right? Explained the way that that teacher explained it to a group of us. It's never left my mind as an analogy. And I find when I'm, through my own practice, that has been, it feels absolutely right. Now, these are, of course, they could not be more different because she does not look, and this card, the tiger, none of it looks like the crest of that wave, right? And yet, what do we have here? Where's the fire in this image? It's the lantern. And that's going to be important in just a second here. The first thing she writes in the book is the flame in the hermit's lamp. That's the first almost sentence. It's actually a fragment. that is her, ostensibly her first sentence. So the 9 of Wands is, the flame in the lamp. This is, the flame, she's holding it, inside the lamp, but she's also an expression of it. And, my keyword for this one is fierce authenticity, because whether that expression is wrathful, whether it is peaceful, whether it is creative, whether it is destructive, it is all, if it's authentic, it can't be wrong in the 9 of Wands, right? If the 9 of Wands is upside down, or it's ill aspected by other cards, we can see that it's being stifled somehow, that it's not being given its full room to be expressed. But that's essentially where we're going with that 9 of Wands. Yeah. All right, so enough about that. Moving on to the 9 of Swords. And I ask your willingness to bear with me here, because this is going to be filmed on a couple of different days. You'll notice, I'm sure, anyone who's read the with the Mariel will notice immediately. These do not look like anything like the same type of message we might get in the Rider-Waite-Smith. So Rider-Waite system readers, you're going to find this to be, probably have already found this to be really confusing. Like, how is she coming up with this? Why is it like this? Why isn't it more, why doesn't it more resemble the cards from those decks? And this is why we're doing this whole series, is to understand where is she coming from philosophically. She's connecting, very intentionally in an almost alchemical, hermetic, definitely Kabbalistic way, how all of these are similar and a part of one another. Okay, but without needing to become proficient necessarily in any of those areas of study, I think it's important just to look at the cards themselves and find out how they connect to one another, which she does detail in the book. But again, unless you've done a super deep dive, that's just hard to get to on your own. It's a lot of work. But, this was why I wanted to make the videos, because I enjoyed that process. That's something that for me is really exciting with a deck like this. I don't always have the ability to do that with every deck or with every system, but I'm grateful that I did it with this one. So with this Nine of Swords, again, it definitely looks nothing like what we've come to expect from the Nine of Swords, right? It is definitely not a nightmare. We have, first of all, the contrast of these two pillars, right? We've got a lamp or a lighthouse, right? So we're carrying on this theme of light and water. So we've got the lighthouse, and we've got one here that is definitely like perfectly okay. It is, the land and the rock that it's based upon is pretty solid. It's also a white tower or a white pillar. Then we have black tower, a black white lighthouse or pillar that is about to be consumed by the waves, right? So again, we're weighing opposites. But you'll notice, because we see it here on this side, with our Nine of Cups, they're reversed. Okay, so we've got the two pillars, which she likes. These motifs appear everywhere in the tarot anyway, but she's very specific about the repetition and where she places them, right? So she's placed them here in the Nine of Cups. She's placed them here in the Nine of Swords. We'll get to Nine of Cups here shortly, but with the Nine of Swords, you'll notice they're flipped, because we have come through, a gateway upon which we look back and see everything in the world as completely different. Okay. Now, she does also mention a lot about Hermetic Kabbalah. And so I am going to address that just a little bit here, because what she writes is that we need to view this almost like the Tree of Life, which, hey, look, I happen to be studying at the moment, and I have here, although it is covered in my journal and a pen and my phone. Let's see if I can, bits and pieces, because I tend to create with chaos. That's just how I am. Whoops, there's another, these are from my Zen calendar. So if we flip this around, she talks about this up here, right, representing Kether. Okay, or this might be more user-friendly just to look at this one. So, and it's similar size. Here we go. So she is, this is the innermost temple, or Kether, and by the time we get to the very bottom here, we're, at Malkuth. So we're on Earth, right? We're part of the earthly kingdom. And she talks about that journey, that as we go down the Tree of Life from conception through to something solid, and then climb back up, that doing so is almost like coming through a gateway, right? When we come back to this point of creation, it's coming through a gateway, and when we look back, we can see the entire picture. All right, we see the full picture of what is and what isn't. We have an almost as above, so below here, right? We have the goddess Maat here with her wings, or Isis. And then everything's kind of yellow above this point. Below it, everything is very solid. And we have the raven who's clearly moving from what is below to what is above. Okay. And I think actually that raven's coming through the gateway towards us, right? He's coming to this place where he's able to see what's above and below in order to see the greater architecture of things as they are and of what that looks like. Okay. She writes in the book, and this is on the second page of it, many describe enlightenment as moving down the Tree of Life, being created, and then, so being created as we move down the Tree of Life, right? So we end up in the as below. We start out as an as above, and we end up as below. Many describe enlightenment as moving down the Tree of Life, being created, and then intentionally moving back up the Tree of Life and finding the ultimate mystical experience, the direct vision of God. This is the Nine of Swords. It is the highest, most exalted state of an intentional human being. She goes further and says, it is also the dissolution of the same as you walk out of the world of time and separateness and into eternity where all is one. The two pillars, duality, that allowed your creation now are a guide back to that place of your source. This is a triumph. It is spiritual gold. It is immortality. So something else that's worth noting about this Nine of Swords is that she really emphasizes point of view. And she writes a lot in the description about the Nine of Swords, about how normally she paints the, as she has here, right? She paints the dark pillar on the left and the light pillar on the right, right? Because the right hand's dominant, yang, the non-dominant hand or the yin, and so on and so forth. And it seems almost like, ultimately, if you reread that section, it sounds almost like she didn't realize that she had painted these in the opposite. But she goes on to mention that it's about the point of view. So if we're in a position where we've been through all of this cycle and we know it well, we're able to see that whole perspective, right? Whereas if we're only, in the space where, we can only see what's visible to the naked eye, that point of view then is going to shape everything. We won't see that there's a possibility of climbing back up the tree of life, for example, or we won't see, in the same way, right? Look here. In this Nine of Swords, the Dark Tower, we could say, is what's most at play, right? Isn't that interesting? If what's most apparent at this moment is the dark, that's what we're going to see. We will miss the light half of it. Likewise, if all we are is obsessed with the light and we don't want to look at what's dark, that's all we're going to see. But if we use that awareness and shine it into the dark, we start to see what's there, right? We start to uncover it. And doing that is what leads to climbing back up. It's the inclusion of both perspectives. It's the inclusion of duality as it is, without needing to choose this over that, without saying this one good, that one bad, right? I always have clients that say, is that bad? Does that mean everything's bad? Of course not. Of course it doesn't. It just means that we need to include the negative in with the positive. We have to be able to embrace all of it in order for anything to become enlightened, right? It has to be part of the picture. So in this scenario, all of it is part of the picture because of the level of realization. Okay? So because this is depicting tremendous realization of the mind, a mind that is highly realized, we're able to see the whole picture, encompass it, and coexist with everything. Okay? Now, that said, of course, I did go and I knew at some point I had a card that would help us better understand this, or at least correspond. So anyone who's really into nerding out, okay, this is the from the Rotomundy Tarot. All right, so in the Rotomundy Tarot, the Nine of Swords, and I don't know how visible that's going to be, but that is a 9 with a sword stuck through it. The Nine of Swords in this deck is success realized. And if any of you watched, I recently did a walkthrough of this deck, and when I did, something that hit me as I was walking through it was how much it reminded me of the Marielle. Now, obviously, the artwork is nothing alike. But, if you look at it from another perspective, we're seeing duality. Okay, we're seeing something that's, heavenly on top. And those are some kinds of like snakes and beasts and so forth on the bottom. Then we've got a sun. There's a lot in here that bears some resemblance. But more than anything, it's you know, this key word of success realized. Okay, so it's not just this deck where that's the case. There, you know, she's rooting this in a deep understanding of a lot of different Hermetic philosophy. Moving on to the Nine of Cups. So what do we have here? This, I think, is less of a stretch, okay? For most of us, this is going to be a much, much, much less of a stretch. Because what do we still have here? Even though it's not a dude from the RWS who's all, you know, super duper happy and satisfied about all of his cups sitting up there, we have, you know, essentially we have a baboon with his arms crossed and his feet planted, and he is very satisfied. So an RWS reader picking up this deck where you see the keywords Nine of Cups is immediately going to go, oh, okay, wait a minute. Yes, okay. There's something to grab onto there that's helpful. You know, that's going to help us have the ability to move forward. That said, again, we have the concept of these two towers here on either side. And we have the folded arms. We have a Jacob's ladder or a stairway to heaven back there. And we also have this scorpion down here that seems ready to pinch or grab this happy, satisfied baboon. We have the Ankh hanging down here that he's holding. And we have the black and white of the two towers represented in the floor. So there's an integration going on. The symbol of integration taking place here. The baboon's mind, you know, his eyes are lifted up and to this direction, which is definitely not going to come across here. But that is, in fact, where his eyes are headed. You know, his mind is elevated and climbing to heaven, even though his feet are on the ground. So indeed, this is still about being satisfied. It's about being comfortable with where you are. And it's about recognizing, you know, that in some respect, regardless of our journey, right, regardless of how enlightened we may think we are, she makes the point in here that we're all sort of just a big monkey. We're all kind of a big monkey enjoying this journey. And it doesn't, you know, we have our carnal impulses and ideas. The things that drive us are often very low in nature, right? They're not elevated. We're driven by reproduction. We're driven by the need to eat and sleep and have shelter and be dominant. We get into fights about domination over all sorts of things, right? When you think about it. So we're all kind of just ruled by all of these incredible bestial impulses. And yet we have this amazing ability to turn the mind towards something much higher. We have the ability to climb higher. And when we do that, it doesn't mean that we leave this behind. So this is another a yes and card, right? And in many ways, all of these are yes and cards, right? In the Nine of Wands, the authenticity is coming from, yes, I am fiery and creative and wonderful. I'm also brash and difficult, and I say things the wrong way and so forth. But as long as I'm with my authenticity, it's the right thing to do. You know, it will be triumphant in some respect, right? In the Nine of Swords, we're embracing the dark thoughts as well as the light thoughts, the enlightened mind as well as the unenlightened mind. All of the things that will bring us closer to full realization, which means that we embrace everything, that there are no parts of us that escape the light, right? The light shines down on the enlightened and the unenlightened in a similar fashion. Okay. When we get to the Nine of Cups, again, we're seeing the same concepts at play here. This time through emotions, through physical drives, emotional drives. It becomes much more worldly when we get to the cups and the discs for her. So when Marie White goes into talking about this Nine of Cups card, she is really specific about her choice of this baboon and about the way she views cups. So in this first paragraph of the description of that card, she writes, I've radically changed my views of cups or the element of water over the years. Once I thought of it as emotion, relationships, and the like. I still do, but I think of those things as merely the surface ripples of a deep well of truth and knowledge. So, it's not that the more mundane aspects of the cups aren't there for her. They're totally there. But she's willing to say, okay, that may be just the top of it. That's the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And then underneath, there's a huge amount of stuff going on. She goes further, writing, emotions are a language that our subconscious uses to motivate us, to prod us, to communicate with us. That knowledge is the knowledge of our entire ancestry. Which I think is fascinating, because when you consider, the popular scientific theory is that we came out of the water, we crawled out of the water, and evolved out of the water. And so in some respects, also being made of predominantly water, between 70 and 90% at any point in time. Everything, our DNA, everything, our ancestry, all of it is dependent on water. Do you see where she's going there? Like the depth, she's really plumbing the depths of this concept. And when we go back and look at, say, her original high priestess, wow, which happens to be conveniently right here, thankfully. I didn't have to dig for it. Her original high priestess in the first edition really reflects that as the sort of dark mother, the divine mother, the mother who carries all of the DNA within her and climbs up from the depths. And, the two pillars in this case are her legs. And, the void is really the portal of the uterus from which everything is born. Okay, that's where she's going with her analogy of water and the depth, that she's using to come from. The element of the moon is water too. So she's giving the high priestess, a heavy, heavy, heavy element of water here. And that's why. So that is her, that's what originally informed her thinking. She, of course, changed the high priestess. I've talked about that extensively, but it's always good to just continue to draw these ideas in and weave them together, right? The scorpion is the next thing I want to just look at here, because this is it's kind of weird the way she just interjects this into this card and into her philosophy around this card. Okay, you could really do a lot with just the simple things that I've kind of offered up there without necessarily needing to go a whole lot deeper. But I do think it's interesting because it brings us back to the point of the humility, right? She also, I should say too, those of you who are like, what about this Ankh, Nat? Aren't you going to just address that Ankh? Okay, let's just talk about the Ankh really quick. The Ankh is there to signify that this is supposed to be Thoth. She says the baboon is an aspect of Thoth. That's about the only way in which she really addresses that Ankh, is to make sure that we don't miss it. All right. Then she says, does it seem strange to have the god of science, math, and measurement as the main character of a cup card? Yes. And that's when she says, I've actually radically changed my perspective on, all of these things. And I know, it's a lot. It's a lot, guys. I know. Because you have to kind of almost get inside her head a little bit to really get where she's going from one idea to the next. And it's a challenge. Let's not worry about that right at this moment. Let's come back to this scorpion here, because she does address that. And again, it's not necessarily an easy jump that she's about to make. Okay, because you'll notice in your book, if you've read the description, or if you go back to read the description, she sort of goes from talking about the stairway to heaven and jumps straight from there down to here. And the scorpion is there to represent death. All right, so we need that. We need to know that. There's an imminent threat of death. What does she say in the very beginning of the book? In her prologue, she talks about how death and plagues, time periods in which plagues have overcome everyone, very relevant to us right now in 2022, watching this, I think. They have a way, death levels us. It's the ultimate humiliator, in the sense that it brings us humility, because nobody can escape death. We all find death. It doesn't matter if you're Jeffrey Epstein. It doesn't matter if you are Prince Andrew or Queen Elizabeth. It doesn't matter who you are. You're going to die. Okay, we're all going to die. And that scorpion there threatens that baboon's life simply with its presence. And so I think in that way we could say, like, well, in that sense, we're all no better than anyone else. So we may as well be a lowly monkey or baboon. That's my interpretation, not necessarily hers. Here's what she actually writes. The columns represent a doorway to eternity. With this card, the doorway is reached through death. From death comes knowledge. If our mother is the womb we are born from into life, the grave is the womb to the afterlife. I wanted to point out this aspect with a scorpion on his foot, the same one that chases Orion through the sky and bites him on the heel. It kills you so you can make the final journey. Death could be the end of anything, though, in context. And then that's it. That's all she says on the matter, okay? She just kind of drops us with that and then leaves it, and kind of, expects that we're going to make the connection between that and what she's written elsewhere in the book, I think. She's got the most extraordinary mind, an experiential kinesthetic sense of things, right? But I think, she could write easily like a 500-page book, that, someone like me would dive head first into and just feel like I died and gone to heaven, no pun intended. But, it's a lot to take in. So again, that's why I wanted to mention her, the High Priestess, the way she views cups, that's all still an important aspect of understanding where she's going there. Okay. So that, we also have this aspect here of the possibility that the baboon's going to be stung by the scorpion. And whether he's just a simple baboon or whether he's Thoth, he's still going to die and go and be reborn. Notice there's water back here, right? And this almost could be the High Priestess card, almost. And in fact, if you're using the second edition, I should have brought out my second edition version of our High Priestess. I'll have to go through this deck here in a minute and grab it. But, what you're going to see is he could be going and traveling back up that ladder to be reborn, into eternity, right? We're still doing as above, so below, even in this one. All right. So, the final idea that she throws at us here is one that I really like. She brings in the Wizard of Oz. I love the Wizard of Oz. Who doesn't love the Wizard of Oz? So she says, often as I worked on this, I thought of the Wizard of Oz. It reminded me of the scene where the dog pulled back the curtain and revealed that the great Wizard of Oz was really just an old man, and that everyone was capable of fulfilling their own wishes. This is the same. They are all you. All of those characters. The lion, the tin man, the straw man, the dog, Dorothy, the witches, the flying monkeys, the munchkins, the wizard and the dog, and anyone else I left out. They are all you. Oz is on the inside. Kansas is on the outside. And you think that there is a great magic that can save you or accomplish things for you or whatever. But in the end, when you pull back the curtain, when you stand in front of the high priestess and you pull back the veil, all you see is just a common monkey marveling at the world. And you realize that there is nothing else. And you realize there doesn't need to be anything else because this is enough. And that even a lowly monkey is divine and will live on in eternity. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. Let's just grab the High Priestess card from the second edition here. Okay, so here is why she's ultimately able to justify her choice to have this High Priestess replace the original one. You know, initially I was so upset. And I watched, you know, interviews with her and so forth and thought, are you kidding me? Because I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, how do you just go from, you know, creating this, this kind of setup for us to understand the element of water within the deck and then switch to this, right? But ultimately what she's done here is drop this veil, okay, and let us see what's behind it, because as a metaphor for how we move back from being on this, you know, this is the Great Oz. This is what happens when the veil is removed. Wizard of Oz. Oops, what's behind the curtain? Toto, help. Oh, look, it's just this guy. Okay. So we're still, you know, she's still playing in the correct playing field. You know, she's just doing it. She's doing it her own way. She's definitely doing it her own way. I also like the way in which she, you know, she talks about all of the characters in The Wizard of Oz, right? That you know, the big learning, the big experience that we get from The Wizard of Oz is that all of those characters were not outside of her. They were all within her. They were all her. You know, Oz is inside of us. The magic is inside of us. It lives within us. And even though we may appear to be only a lowly monkey, like Thoth, we have all of that capability and capacity to be the Wizard of Oz as well as Dorothy. Okay, so Dorothy is the Wizard of Oz. She just doesn't know it yet. It's a brilliant psychoanalysis, right, of you know, Jungian proportion in terms of parts, you know, parts therapy or parts work. It's brilliant. So essentially what we have here is accept and love all of your parts because they are you. They're not separate from you. And the embracing of them is what brings us humility and contentment, right? Because ultimately, those are my keywords for this card, right? Contentment and humility. This dude lacks the humility. See where I'm going there? There is no, this is wealth and contentment with wealth and beautiful gold chalices and so on and so forth. This is contentment with whatever the hell is there. And it may be, you know, it may not be very pleasant, But there's a humility and a contentment that comes from acceptance. Acceptance of what? Acceptance of the dark, acceptance of the light, and the willingness to sit between the two and take the middle path, right? So in that respect, we could also say, for those of you who are super duper into Kabbalah, if you think about it, we have we have the little triangle at the top, and ultimately the monkey, and we have the Keter, right? And then the Malkuth down here with the scorpion. And really, this monkey is representing that middle path. So I know these are getting long, and it's because as the deck progresses, her explanations of the cards also progresses. And she includes a great deal more detail, and the significance of what's portrayed in each of the cards becomes more and more significant as well. That said, the 9 of Discs is virtually worthy of its own entire video, probably 40-minute video, just to get through it and get through all of its meanings, because essentially, within that description, she has really almost overbaked this card to the degree that it sort of represents all of Hermetic philosophy and the entire theory of Hermeticism and alchemy. Okay, so it's more than we can possibly cover in this video. So as I went back through the 9 of Discs, I thought, okay, what the hell am I going to say about this? Here's what you need to know. All right. The 9 of Discs has a very simple keyword that I've assigned to it, which is perfect harmony. And it is the reflection of all things that could potentially be in opposition coming together into a position of perfect harmony. All right. And as we have something above, so we have it below. And it's not a matter of feeling divided between the two in some way. All right. We don't feel so much of the divide here in the 9 of Wands, but certainly in the Swords and Cups, there's a divide, which is appropriate because we're looking at head versus heart, right? Reason versus emotion, ether and air versus the memory of water, and its ancestral connection to everything that's alive on the planet. Then we get to, the 9 of Discs, and ultimately what do we have? We have a hermaphroditic, Baphomet thing that is sitting on top of the earth, and there's just so much in here. We also have the pillars. We have one pillar here, the other pillar here. We've got the moon above and the moon below. We've got we've got the caduceus. Everything in here is so overbaked. It's almost, again, it's almost a thesis of its own. She ends the entire description of the 9 of Discs with the emerald tablets, okay? So we're looking really at a sense that, anything that you could possibly achieve that could be achieved both in the physical realm and the spiritual realm has been accomplished. That means you've resolved everything psychologically, everything in one's life, as it is lived, as it was lived, as it is being lived, is in a state of harmony that is so perfect, it is virtually undescribable. All right, that said, there are a few little details in here I thought were interesting and worthy of cherry picking. If you're going to read with the deck, as most of us are, we're just looking to read the frickin' deck. How do I read the deck? If you're going to read the deck, the 9 of Discs is simple. It's perfect harmony. You know, something's been accomplished, something's been achieved, things have fallen into place. You know, will I get the raise at work? Yes, you will. Absolutely you will. You don't see it yet, but as it's above, you know, it's in the works and it's about to manifest, right? Will my boyfriend pop the question? In fact, he will. He's already planned everything and is about to bring it to fruition. See where I'm going there? You know, this should be pretty self-explanatory in many respects. It lacks any of the negativity that we would find really in you know, in the Nine of Pentacles in the RWS, right? It doesn't have that. It doesn't have the isolation necessarily, although it could, because while this woman is in a garden, this hermaphroditic being, and this, even though it has breasts and we don't see a phallus, theoretically the caduceus in this case is where the penis went. But this is intended, you know, this could be a singular being in a garden on the planet, right? Because how many perfectly harmonized, perfectly balanced, you know, Hermes Trismegistus individuals do we really know, right? And the interesting thing here is that, you know, the ordinariness of who we are in the Nine of Cups is also what contains the potential for each of us to be no different than Hermes Trismegistus. In this card, she's actually saying this is Hermes Trismegistus realized and brought into being. Not just as a theory, but as a reality, as a lived reality. Okay, so this is somebody who, this would be the person, this is the great and powerful Oz behind the curtain as just the monkey, no different than you and me. This is someone who has realized that they are the monkey that is Oz. They have embraced it, and for them there is no difference between, they literally feel no difference between the monkey who is behind the curtain and the great and powerful Oz himself. And in a way that has balance and harmony. So not egoic, not, you know, it is a level of enlightenment and enlightened attainment in a physical body that is something that few of us, if any, will ever see. Okay, that's what's being represented or aspired to in this card. You know, on a mundane level, again, it's just bringing things into a supreme balance, a perfect harmony. If you're reading for someone who's on a spiritual journey, you know, depending on where this card is, where it shows up and in relationship to other cards, if you're a reverse reader, for example, they're falling short. Okay, there's something that's being fallen short of. You know, if it is in this sort of a state, they're on the right track within that spiritual journey. But there's a lot more, you know, through working on this card that could be, let's put it this way, I'm still working on this card. You know, I'm working on all of them still. No matter what happens and no matter what, I'm like, oh yeah, here's what this means and so on. The truth is, I'm still working on all of these cards. They're all still living within me because I'm still taking in detail and I learn something new every time I come back to the guidebook or pull my, you know, cards for a reading for myself. There's still something new to learn. But that is essentially where we need to go. So here's something that she says that I find interesting. There's a couple of things that she says about this card that I find very, very interesting indeed. I was brought back to a statement by Joseph Campbell, one of my heroes, that if you cross the threshold but are not ready, gods will appear as devils. I believe that to be true. The great power of a person, be it yourself or another, can be a very scary thing. It is also scary to face our animal nature, which wants things like sex and food and all manner of unseemly behavior, and so potent symbols can resemble devils. I think that's fascinating. So she's describing, some people find this one frightening because it looks like a Baphomet, right? And we're taught, those of us who grew up during the Satanic Panic will find this distressing, because there's something in us that's been implanted that Baphomet is terrible, right? This is intended as a revisioning of the Baphomet that Eliphas Levi drew originally. So it bears some resemblance. If I think to or remember to, I will pull up an image of it here on the screen so that you can get a sense of what that would look like. But essentially, she's saying you'll know when you look at this card by your reaction to it where you are personally on that journey. So if you're someone who has been conditioned to feel as though the devil is bad, right? As though a Baphomet is bad. Or the Baphomet is the devil and, Satan and so on and so forth, you're going to struggle with this card, right? Because at that stage, what she's saying is, you've crossed the threshold on some level before being ready. So that this is going to appear not as a god, but as a demon. Something to be terrified of. Why? Because of its ability to fully embrace its bestiality and its darkness. Right? All of the things about ourselves that we hate are the things that we're going to project onto others. In that sense, we also get the view of scapegoat, right? Baphomet as a goat. Something upon, and that's deep in our psyches, something that we're going to pin our sins onto, the things about ourselves that we most hate and despise, and then we're going to sacrifice that goat. And she talks about that here too. She mentions, I find it endlessly fascinating that people both demonize farm animals and hold them in such high esteem as to compare them to gods and goddesses, not to mention as a sacrifice that is an equal trade for a human life, right? So the scapegoat as a sacrifice, to give the gods a repayment so that our sins can be forgiven, that our sins can disappear along with the goat. Casting our demons into a herd of swine and then drowning the swine. This is what she's pointing to. So, this is, like I said, there's a whole thesis. I have heard a lot of people say very different things, like that this card is extremely upsetting to them and extremely triggering. And if you're in that category, that's completely normal. We have been conditioned to feel that way, right? In every possible sense. When you really examine it, and I fully encourage you to do so, really get back and reread the entire description that she gives of this card. And if there are enough people who are interested in it, we can have a further dialogue about this card and its symbolism. It's a really good one for working through your own ideas about dark and light and about what that means, right? About the things that bother you, the things that hurt or upset you, and what that means. Ultimately what she's coming back to is the idea that, let's see, I know she wrote it here and I just had it. Yeah, she writes, discs strive to integrate all of the elements. In the 8, we passed through a gate, through a threshold into the unknown where we had to, more than anything else, know ourselves. In the 9, we do know ourselves. We know every element of our being, the fire, the water, the air, and the earth, and it all comes together in a beautiful, natural order. That's where we're getting to, and that's what we need to understand. The final thing I'm going to point out here that we want to understand, because it's going to help us connect this 9 of discs, as I often try to, with our next suit, or with our next number, which is the 10s. Okay, and what we see here in the belly, right, in the pelvis of this being, is a wheel. All right, and what she writes about that wheel is, I've considered this wheel the wheel of Dharma. It is nothing new. In fact, it's quite ancient, to portray the earth and life and the laws of nature as a wheel. Everything is a wheel. Tarot, Torah, Yod-He, Vav-He, etc. forever. Dharma can mean many things, and the foremost on my mind as I did this was that it was the law of natural order of things, and our progression to reaching our potential, individual or as a society, or in many different ways. Okay, so this is what's important. You know, she's seeing everything as a wheel. Everything is a wheel. And this will ultimately be what links us right back to this concept in the 10s. All right, where we know that the Wheel of Fortune is, of course, 10. So I hope you've managed to get something out of this. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. And these have been long, and, you know, it gets intense as we get to the 9s. The 10s, less so. They're a little bit more straightforward. The symbolism is also straightforward, and I think they'll be much easier for us to get through. So until then, I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.